The 1989 Upper Deck baseball set is one of the most iconic from the late 80s. Not only does it have the iconic card of Ken Griffey Jr., but it also has several other Hall of Famers in it as well, including John Smoltz and, of course, Randy Johnson. So Randy Johnson, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. His cards have long been considered undervalued by some collectors. While pitchers have never done as well in the hobby, Randy Johnson is just clearly one of the best there's ever been. And take a look at his stats. Over 300 career wins, a 3.29 ERA, and 4,875 strikeouts and 4,100 innings. So, one of the most dominant pitchers of all time, 5-time Cy Young. And, of course, he won the 2001 World Series with the Arizona Diamondbacks against the Yankees. Of course, he also did play for the Yankees later in his career as well. So Randy Johnson, just one of the most dominant pitchers of all time. It's funny because early in his career, he was a very wild pitcher, and over time, he did actually rein in his control. He used to walk everybody, and then later in his career, he did finally get his blazing fastball under control. So he became one of the most dominating left-handed pitchers of all time. And yet, this is a guy who his cards, were pretty cheap. Even just a few months ago, you could find this, his BGS 9.5 Gem Mint card for as low as, $25. So, if you were picking up these cards a year ago, you could get them for maybe $19, $20. But today, you'd be lucky to find one for less than $50. So this card has been particularly hot on the pit recently, as we take a look at the sales history. So this has definitely been one of our market movers in the past couple days or so. We'll take a look at the sales history. So as you can see here, even in March, we actually had a sale of this card for $25.95, and then and actually, believe it or not, on the 20th of April, we actually had a sale on this card for $21. So it actually had gone down a little bit in value, but as you can see, this was a card that was and that would sell anywhere from $18 to $25. It didn't really have a consistent sale, sale history. But then as we get into late April, you can see the price slowly would climb, $28.95, $29, $39, and then $44 just yesterday on the 28th. We had 4 sell, and then we had another one sell. So we actually had, let's see, 2, 4, 7. We had 7 trades. 2, 4. Yeah, so we had 4, 8. We had 9 sales. We had 9 sales of this card just yesterday. And so, which is pretty incredible that the trading has gotten pretty fierce on this card. So let's take a look at the population report, and we'll look at the PSA 10 as well. So on Beckett, this card has over almost 12,000 graded copies, but only has 1,884 BGS 9.5. So BGS 9.5 is basically the equivalent that Beckett has to PSA 10. Their 10 is considered pristine, so it's even more valuable grade than a PSA 10. But if we take a look at the PSA population, they're actually a lot more in PSA, and there's 4,090 PSA 10s out of 27,000 total. So the population is, when you look at the amount versus how many have been graded, is pretty similar. So what's interesting though is if you take a look at the other big card in the set, which is, of course, Ken Griffey Jr. Ken Griffey Jr. has over 37,000 of these graded by Beckett, and only 2,761 9.5. So there's way more of the Griffey's graded, and yet there's less 9.5s, which is kind of interesting. So the only inference that I can make from that is that I'm talking percentage-wise. So there's obviously more 9.5s, but percentage-wise, there's a lot fewer of them by volume of the complete amount graded. So what this makes me think is that this card, that the Griffey card, is just a card that they just don't hand out the grades as easily for Ken Griffey Jr. as they do for the PSA. So we'll actually look at the PSA. that they do with the Randy Johnson. So we'll take a look at the PSA 10 now. And this card, of course, most people, most collectors do tend to prefer PSA over BGS, especially for older cards. As you can see, there's quite a few of these for sale on the pit. We'll also take a look at recent sales history. So here we go, and just looking at this, you can see a lot of April dates. And so this was a card that really was sitting around $50 for a very long time, and we actually had a sale on March 30th for $46. But then you can see the prices slowly creep up. People watching the market and selling the pit some copies, and just steadily the price keeps going up, and then all of a sudden, this past week, people started actually actively buying them. So this price went from, in the space of a week, from the 20th to the 27th, this card went from, let's see, it went from $60 to $95 just in the space of a week, which is unbelievable. Now it's at $105, so pretty nuts. But I mean, you could say that this is a market correction, because if you have Ken Griffey Jr.'s PSA 10 selling for something like 1350 or $1,400, is Randy Johnson's card worth a fraction of that? Well, maybe not. I mean, obviously Ken Griffey Jr. Has card number one in the set, and he's just the icon. He's the most iconic player from the set, and I think because of Ken Griffey Jr., Randy Johnson's cards get a little bit overlooked. And obviously, there aren't nearly as many Randy Johnsons as there are Ken Griffey Jr.'s. But it is interesting when you take a look at the pop reports, and this is true of PSA as well. You see how there's 4,090 PSA 10s compared to 27,000 for Randy Johnson. But then when you look at Ken Griffey Jr.'s, he only has 3,793 tens out of 73,000. So that's an even more staggering difference. And so there's actually more PSA 10s of Randy Johnson compared to, okay, that's the BGS. The PSA 10s, there's more PSA 10s than there are of Ken Griffey Jr. And that's actually pretty staggering when you think about the fact that there's like 3 times as many cards graded. I mean, not three times as many, but more than 2 times as many cards, 2.5 times as many cards graded by PSA of Ken Griffey Jr. When compared to Randy Johnson. So Randy Johnson's cards, they should technically be rarer, but there's actually more PSA 10. So that's actually kind of interesting when you think about it. So his card is not like really that much more common, but the PSA 10s are more common. And I think the main reason this has happened is, as I've said, that the grading companies, especially back in PSA, they just don't want to hand out 10s on such an expensive card. I mean, and people have said that not all 10s are created equal, and that's definitely true when it comes to 89 Upper Deck. And actually, we'll take a look at some of the other big names, and we'll look at PSA here. Um, so there's some other rookies like Sadie Alomar, Greg Jeffries were big at the time. Gary Sheffield is another big name in the set. Sheffield, of course, not in the Hall of Fame, but of course he put up the numbers that you would suggest he be in the Hall of Fame. He's over 500 home runs in his career, and he has 7,400. Only 7,400 copies have been graded by PSA, and 2,020 of those have been graded 10. So that's a staggering difference. So that means that more than a quarter of his cards have been graded PSA 10. The highest grade available. And when you take a look at Randy Johnson, we'll look at Smoltz as well in a second. But you look at this. I mean, he's got, let's see, that's something like, yeah. So it's less than a quarter. So significantly less than a quarter. So it's kind of interesting how the percentages work that way. And then you look at John Smoltz, and John Smoltz is even more eye-opening, because he only has about 3,800 graded, and 1,469 of those are 10. So like almost 1 out of 2 are getting, not 1 out of 2, but more than a third are getting graded PSA 10. So it's kind of interesting how these are, and then of course John Smoltz is a Hall of Famer as well. And so it's kind of interesting how when you look at these population reports, you can kind of see that certain cards are just a lot harder to get graded in a 10. I mean, and that makes sense. I mean, it makes sense, because if you hand out too many 10s, that actually will drive down the prices, because of course the more there are, the lower the price is going to be eventually. it all kind of evens out. So it's clear to see that even at $100 in a PSA 10, Randy Johnson's card is actually very undervalued when you consider. I mean, I'm not saying that this card is going to be worth $1,000, but what I can say is that this is definitely going to be worth more than $110 in a few years, especially the way the market's going. Now, of course, the market is just on fire right now. As people are spending stimulus checks and spending money that they'd be spending on other sports things with sports not going on. This is really the only way for people to get their sports fix. And I would say that the BGS 9.5 is actually even more undervalued. Like the gap between this card and this card is huge. Like usually, I mean, typically the PSA cards have been worth about 30% more than the BGS, sometimes 40%, whereas this is like 60% more. The PSA has 60% more than the BGS 95. Well, right now I think there's one at the pit for 53. So, but still, I mean, is this card worth half of what the PSA 10 is? I don't think so. I think that the BGS 95, if you're looking to get into volume, I think that this is the better card to get, and that's been the case on the pit. Definitely, this has been the more active card compared to the PSA 10. And it's just because the PSA 10 is twice as much money for essentially the same card. It goes back to the old saying, "Buy the card, not the holder." So that's definitely good advice in this case. So yeah, so that's been a big mover on the pit. What is and there of course are other Randy Johnson rookie cards, but this is obviously the big one because of the fact that it's in such an iconic set. So what do you guys think of these Randy Johnson cards? Do you think this card is as undervalued as it seems to be, or do you think this is a fair price for this card? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So we'll be back soon with more sports card market mover reports from thepit.com. This is Ari Rowell signing out.